Okay, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everyone as usual. At Gyobutsuji, we have some special guests in-house. So we have another crowded venue of 4 people. Ryushin, who was here for over 4 months, just left the other day. So we've had more people at Gyobutsuji than lately, but we always love to get visitors. So at the end of the talk, we might let them say hello if they want to. We have Jeremy and Sky here, so they've come from out of town to be at Gyobutsuji, and we appreciate practicing with them this morning. So I'm going to get started on our talk today. So for several weeks, months now, I've been talking about a particular writing of Eihei Dogen, who is a very important Zen master in our lineage, and I spoke about him a little bit this morning during our Zazen instruction, and we've been talking about this this piece of his that he wrote back in the 13th century, so it's a very old text. Dogen Zenji he was born in 1200, and he is the founder of Soto Zen in Japan. So he's a very important Zen master in our lineage, and we study his teachings quite a bit. So this particular writing is called Makahannyaharamitsu. So it's a kind of commentary on the Heart Sutra, which is a very important text in Zen and in Mahayana Buddhism in general. So the Heart Sutra talks about emptiness. It's a short but very important sutra, as I said. So as we've gone along during this Makahannyaharamitsu study, we've talked about the Heart Sutra a lot. I do have some talks on YouTube about the Heart Sutra too. So when we really go deeply into this text, we need to study the Heart Sutra as well. We'll talk a little bit about it today, but we might address any questions people have about the relationship between these texts at the end if we need to. So for right now, we will start on paragraph 3 of the text. And I should say that just from last time to review, we talked about the 18 elements. So this, I talked a little bit about this morning in our instruction, and this is where the Buddha talks about the subject-object relationship and how that causes suffering. And we talked about Dogen Zenji's teaching on these 18 elements. So today we're going to continue with another aspect of the Buddha's teaching. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because it seems that the Heart Sutra kind of negates the Buddha's basic teachings about, suffering and this subject-object relationship, these different elements of dependent arising. But the Heart Sutra was written actually as a kind of way for people who thought that at the time the Buddha's teachings were being strayed from. So the Heart Sutra is really meant to go back to the real kind of fresh intent of what the Buddha was originally teaching. So in this section, Dogen Zenji says, there are 4 instances of prajna: suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path to cessation. So the Heart Sutra and this text is talking about prajna paramita. So it's a very important term in Buddhism, and that translates to something as the highest wisdom. And in Dogen Zenji's teaching, and actually in the Heart Sutra's teaching, that means the reality itself. And so we talked about that a little bit this morning too, that the highest wisdom that we can encounter, the highest wisdom that we can meet with, is the reality of emptiness, or impermanence and interconnection itself. And that's what the Heart Sutra said. Dogen Zenji said that we meet this emptiness, that we receive and express this emptiness, this prajnaparamita, as Zazen practice, as our Zazen practice that we did this morning. So it's very important, this Zazen practice. And not only in sitting on the cushion, but everything we do in our life, we endeavor to make an expression of our Zazen practice, to express this reality of interconnection with other people and beings, and to express this reality of impermanence and things always changing and being connected to each other without struggling against it or trying to change it or make it go our own way. So that's what Dogen Zenji is really talking about here. So he's talking about the Four Noble Truths. So many of us are probably familiar with this. It's a very the very first teaching that the Buddha gave after his awakening. And so, briefly, the Four Noble Truths are: the first truth is that life contains suffering. Everything we encounter in our life involves suffering. The second noble truth is that the root of that suffering is in our attachment, or in our craving or clinging to things. The third noble truth is that there's an end to this suffering. There's a way that we can end suffering. And the third noble truth, the fourth noble truth, is the way to end this suffering. The Buddha laid out a path called the Eightfold Path that leads to the end of suffering. And actually, so more broadly, that fourth noble truth says that practice is the kind of remedy or medicine to suffering. And not only is it a path, but it's an expression of this reality. That's the part that Dogen Zenji emphasizes, that we don't normally see often when we study the Buddha's early teachings. But actually, if we study the Buddha's life, we see that he taught this Eightfold Path, and he did the things in that Eightfold Path his entire life. So it's not only some path, but it's the expression of this reality. Because before, we hear from the early texts that often, very often, before giving a Dharma talk, the Buddha did Zazen. He kept these precepts, or he kept these elements of the Eightfold Path, and he continued to teach those until the day that he died. So if it was only a path to get from one place to the other, why did he keep doing it? And this is Dogen Zenji's point in this Makahannyaharamitsu, I think, that the Zazen, or the path itself, is the expression of awakening, is the expression of this prajnaparamita. So this first noble truth of suffering, let's just read this, what the Buddha's teaching are in the original text, just very briefly. He says, let's see if I can find it. The Buddha said, birth is dukkha, or birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Death is dukkha, suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Association with the unbeloved is suffering. Separation from the loved is suffering. Not getting what is wanted is suffering. In short, the 5 clinging aggregates are suffering. So basically what the Buddha is saying here is that our suffering arises because we are separated from the beloved, or we have to endure the unbeloved. And so that means people, places, things, any experience. When you study this teaching a little more in a little more detail, it means all objects of our experience, all of those things that are meeting the sense organs, or all of the things that we experience in life, we naturally either run away from them, or we try to get them, or we're indifferent to them if they don't interest us. And he said that that is the problem. That relationship with those objects is the source of our suffering. And this, we don't really think of it so much now, but this is one of the greatest insights of any religion, so to speak. We can probably say it's one of the Buddha's great insights, that it's not the object that causes our suffering. It's not the thing out there that makes us suffer. It's our relationship to those things and how we practice with them. So the Buddha expresses this over and over again, throughout his teachings in different ways. So, it's pretty easy to see this in our life. It's not hard to see how this happens in our own life. When we're just encountering the objects or the things and experiences in our life in the normal way, we're dragged around by them. So something good happens to us, we're happy and we think it's great. The next day, the next moment, the next hour, something difficult happens and we think life is not so great. Or we get bored, we get distracted, or we try to find distraction from our boredom or from our discomfort. And so in this way, what happens, the Buddha called this samsara. This is one way that he talked about samsara, but the cycle of suffering. So we're dragged around in this cycle of the objects that we encounter and our preferences for them. So we can't do very much to really control the objects, the things that we experience in life. We can control it a little bit, but the actual control we have is very minimal compared to the vastness of our life experience. And ultimately, of course, the death, the end of our life, the major sort of source of suffering, we have no control over that. We might be able to avoid thinking about it. We might be able to have a facelift when we get into our 60s, or work out and feel younger for a while. But in the end, we can't escape it. And there's some way that we know, even when things are going well, when we're having a good time, or when things are on the upswing for us, there's some way we know that the downswing is around the corner, and that death, if nothing else, aging and sickness are inevitable. And so even our happy times are suffering. This was the Buddha's teaching, that we know instinctively that any experience is unreliable, because it will change. We can't control. Let's say we get in a new exciting relationship and things are beautiful, everything is beautiful. Something happens and it doesn't work out, and then we're in the depths of sorrow. And sometimes there's very little we can do to control those elements. We have a loved one pass away, we get a serious illness, we win the lottery. A few people might win the lottery, but we know that money can't buy us happiness ultimately. Um, so that is samsara. He also talked about it in a literal way too, about rebirth. And I won't talk about that so much today, but that is samsara. So when we don't practice, we're dragged around by our emotions. And it's pretty easy to see, as I say, how this happens. So I was thinking about this the other day. I was cutting down a dead tree for firewood. I've been so grateful to Jinryu and Ryushin for the last several weeks. We've been working on getting our firewood in for Gyobutsuji. And Ryushin did a lot of work. He's gone now, and we're kind of on the final push. You're really supposed to get it in earlier than this for it to dry in time. But so it was part of my thinking is that he had done all this work, and I had cut down this. Actually, I'd already cut the tree down, and I had my plan for that day. Excuse me. About getting that firewood in the truck, loading it in the space and going to split some of it. And I thought, this is going to be right on schedule. We're really doing well. It's a little behind because we don't have all the wood in, but this will be great because I've been getting a lot of good wood lately. And when I actually went out there and started cutting, some strange things happened with actually I didn't have it down yet, or I can't remember which day it was, but some strange things happened, and the blade, because of the way the tree was rotting on the bottom, the blade got stuck of this chainsaw, and I had several things happen that really slowed it down, and I was way behind what I thought I was going to get done that morning because of things to deal with the chainsaw and unforeseen elements that were happening with the wood. And at some point I stopped and realized I was really quite frustrated. And this is exactly what happens. We have a story in our mind about the way things need to go, and then we compare that story to the reality that we actually encounter, and when they don't match up, we get frustrated, angry, or complain or blame. We blame whatever, the chainsaw or the tree or something for our unhappiness. When in fact, a big part, the major part of that suffering has to do with my relationship to what's happening in the present moment and my grasping to what I think needs to happen rather than meeting in the present moment what is actually happening. So our suffering happens when we make these comparisons and we grasp an idea about what the future needs to be. I need to get this wood in today, otherwise we're behind schedule. Or to the past, so why didn't I foresee that this tree was hollow on the bottom and cut a few inches higher so that this wouldn't happen? Why didn't I, that, or whatever story it might be that we cling to that creates suffering. So if we live in this way, we're dragged around by the experiences that are out of our control. So another, as I say, the Buddha's great insight is that it's the practice with those relationships rather than the things in themselves that are the point. So I want to bring this back and relate it, to what we did this morning. Actually, this Makahannyaharamitsu text is really just about what we did this morning in our Zazen. So, in our Zazen practice, we allow things to just be as they are. And we allow everything to arise they stay for a while, and they dissipate. And we don't cling to that state, any state of mind. We don't reject the unpleasant thoughts about the tree or our anger, or we don't grasp onto it. So we let everything come up, and we let everything dissipate. And this is the expression, of emptiness. Things arising, things conditioned by other things, then things being dissipated. So another great insight of the Buddha was that the biggest story that we tell is this story about an independent, separate person that is outside of connection with other things, and that we make this person and this experience the most important thing, the center of the universe. And we think that if we just, make a good enough story up, or manipulate our environment enough, or our own mind and body enough, that this narrative will come true. But as I've been saying, the story doesn't follow, our desires. Usually. Sometimes it does, but more often than not, it doesn't. So, these are the basic teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and what the Buddha had to say about our connection to the subject-object relationship. So a problem, though, arises. So in this experience that I had when I was cutting the wood, I noticed first that I was frustrated. And then a subtle thing happened after that I realized I was disappointed in myself that I was frustrated. I thought, you ought to be better than that. There was a kind of clinging to some idea of who I should be as a Buddhist, practitioner, and as a person who's been practicing a long time. And there was another added layer of suffering, because once I realized what I was doing with the frustration, I was able to come back to the present and say, wait a minute, what are you doing? Just settle down and get back to work. But then there was this, you didn't do very well there, and you should have done better. And this is what the Heart Sutra is pointing out. This is the kind of subtle thing that happens. So when we don't carefully study and practice with the Buddha's teaching, we find that, we're trying to get to something called enlightenment, or we're trying to get to this perfect state of mind, or we're trying to be this idea of what an awakened person is. And so the Heart Sutra was kind of written later saying, you cannot grasp even to the Buddha's teachings. You cannot say ultimately that, one state of mind is better than another, because then you're just chasing the carrot again, the way the Buddha taught. He said the problem is that we chase this thing, the object that we want, or we try to get away. So when we do this with our practice, we start chasing after enlightenment or a serene, tranquil mind, and we start running away from the angry mind and the bad practitioner that's not doing well. And so the Heart Sutra kind of addressed this, saying we cannot cling to the Four Noble Truths. We cannot cling to these other teachings of the Buddha and say we have to get those things, and those things are true and nothing else. So I think this is what the Buddha actually taught too originally, but we forget. The Heart Sutra, I think, was trying to go back to the Buddha's basic teaching. So that's why in Zen we say no gaining. We don't do it because this is an ascetic practice for macho people that only want to, I mean, or whatever sometimes the kind of attitudes people interpret, like you just do this for its own sake because just things as they are, or some kind of hardcore line. It's actually because we do things in themselves, because when we do things for their own sake, they become prajna paramita. We don't grasp them, and we don't push them away. And so when I was this is what Dogen Zenji is saying, is that our suffering is actually the teaching of the Buddha, or the teaching of emptiness, the teaching of ultimate reality telling us to wake up. It is prajna paramita itself. So when we don't notice that we're suffering, we have a problem. So our suffering is coming to us saying, wake up. Wake up and practice. We often deny it, we look the other way, and we try to distract ourselves, but sooner or later our suffering reality will come to us and say, wake up. And we can choose then, to practice and not be dragged around so much by all of these external objects. And so, Dogen Zenji talked about the fact that we really can't find a separation between those objects and ourself. And the Buddha actually made no distinction between these objects and our own life. And so we need to encounter those things as our own life, rather than things to push away or say are no good or judge. We can't judge other people. We can't judge other things as ultimately good or evil in this way. We can, have the wisdom to see how to practice with those things and how to remedy the situation, but we don't judge them as ultimately good or evil. We judge we don't judge, but we discern what is the most wholesome action to take in the moment, rather than is this thing evil or good. So there's a difference. There's a real difference there. And so that's, I think, what Dogen Zenji is saying here when he says this suffering is prajna paramita. That's an instance of prajna paramita. That's emptiness. That's all beings of interconnection. We say in Mahayana Buddhism that everything is connected to everything else. And we don't find any particular place where there's something that doesn't change or isn't connected to something else. So everything is one life, one reality. And it's continually asking us to wake up. And how our relationship with that experience makes the difference. Our relationship with the objects that we encounter. We can encounter them as things to manipulate, or we can encounter them as things that are us, that we nurture and try to practice with it in a wholesome way. So I think this is really the main thing that I wanted to say today. Let me make sure that I didn't have some note that I wanted to make sure that I got across. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So again, just to reiterate though, the connection between this teaching and what we did this morning is very important. And so that's why we say in Zen that we don't do our Zazen in order to get to some state of mind. We do our Zazen as an expression of emptiness, or of prajna paramita, or Buddha nature, or enlightenment, or whatever we want to call it. And then all of these other things that we do in the Zendo, and the way that we walk, and the way we turn, in the way we go out of the zendo and eat our food, in the way that we talk to each other, the way that we use the toilet, the way that we chop the firewood. We endeavor to make all of those things an expression of our zazen practice, where we encounter everything as ourself, rather than something to be manipulated into the way that we want it. And so that is the way that we reduce, or we drop off this suffering that we create for ourselves and the suffering we create for others. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today, and usually we see if there's any comments or questions, and we can do that today. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say, or any questions they have today? Lacey had something?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I just it it might be a little uh, disjointed, maybe for lack of a better word. I just kind of had this thought while you were talking about this, and so especially when you were talking about the multiple thoughts that started coming up kind of out of nowhere. And I'm sorry, it feels like a really silly question, but it just kind of made me think about um, that old, I can't think of the word for it, but where they kind of thought that um, like flies just came out, or like came out of the dead bodies, that they just kind of came out of nowhere. There wasn't like some kind of anything else before that. It just kind of made me think about these things coming out of nowhere, and um, I just wondered if you would have any comments on that, or of course we would, or you would say, well, there was some kind of a storehouse consciousness thing that happened, but uh, I know it's a silly question, but it, uh, sorry.
So, no, it's not a silly question. So you're talking about the things that arise in the mind, like the objects of the mind.
Yeah, that like I guess that there doesn't necessarily have to be a place that they came from or something before that. I mean, of course there was, but well, I guess I answered my own question there. But uh, I guess just the way that they seem to, I don't know. I feel like as I say it out loud, I'm answering my own question, or realize my question. I'm just gonna stop talking now. I'm sorry. I'm gonna look back at my notes and come up with a better question.
No, I mean, actually, I think what I think you might be pointing to is an important teaching that, we uh, sometimes it's very difficult for us to see how certain things cannot be evil, for example, or certain things, um, seem so intrinsically to create suffering, or to create, something wholesome, or, and I think it's true, there are certain things that we encounter where it's really difficult to say that this is a relative thing, we can't say that it's ultimately good or evil. Sometimes there are certain things we can't imagine what could be good in any context. And but it's actually, in a way, when we look at human history, we find some pretty bizarre stuff where things that we think are unimaginable were accepted, you know, at other times in human history, so that they're so anyway. Uh, but the point is, I think too, to make sure we understand that the reason we have these particular responses to a particular stimuli, for example, are are empty and unimaginable. They come from an unimaginable beginning. You know, that is one of the Buddha's teaching. Like, we have a certain response to something as good or painful or not, and we think that is almost like a given because it's such a sort of ingrained thing in our own body and mind and in human culture. And yet when we study, this is another thing that the Buddha did, was that he in an amazing way, he studied each element, of the human experience and showed how it was conditioned by something beyond it, and that actually we never find some beginning of anything. We never find some end, to any phenomena. And, even the cutting of the tree, so he implied this kind of teaching actually. He implied that when we encounter an object, we can't really make a distinction between that object and our own particular mind. So another element here is that when we encounter that tree, for example, we encounter all of the rain that went into nurturing the acorn. We encounter, all of the air that is supported, or all of the gases that have been moved through the tree, and all of the energy that's moved through photosynthesis, and all the nutrients that come from the ground, all of the whatever the pollinators that created the acorn, all of the innumerable other things that, if we search deeply, we find the sun, we find the moon, we find the trade winds, we find the rotation of the earth around the sun. It goes back immeasurably. So we find no beginning to that tree. We find no end to our connection with it. So, and we find no place where there's a clear boundary actually between the tree and this mind, even though we think there is. So anyway, what it really means is that this self that we invest so deeply in is conditioned, deeply by the things we encounter. So I often say this: all of you now are myself. As I'm speaking here, I'm watching, other people, and the way that you might be responding is the question that Lacey asked is the arising of my experience of myself is due to that. And the way that I encounter the tree or anything conditions this self. There's no self in a vacuum that I can say is me without the objects that it encounters, even if it's my own mind. So that's why we say it's the entire universe, for example, that we practice with in Zazen. Or when we encounter the tree, we encounter it as if we were encountering Buddha or the entire universe. And when we encounter, our own delusions, those also are Buddha. And they are also asking us to wake up, and they're immeasurably conditioned in the past and future and present. So anytime we make this kind of judgment about the goodness or the evil of certain things, ultimately we make this kind of mistake. So the Buddha definitely said there are certain things that are unwholesome, and certain things that create suffering, and certain things that promote awakening. So he gave these kind of two contradictory teachings that it seems like don't go together, but when we study them, they actually are, completely interpenetrated. So, to take care of this body that is infinite, we need to study individual cause and effect. Um, but I think we can really just say we take care of everything we encounter as our own life and as our own self. It's kind of a simple way that we can talk about it. Yes.
I just want to say I really appreciate you going on to talk about that because it clarified a lot more for me, kind of what I was thinking. And then when you first started and talking about like thinking about like where uh, bad things or bad thoughts or something and unwholesome things, I wasn't quite making the connection in what you were saying until the very end of what you said there. So yeah, it was this kind of idea of thinking that like not not uh, filtering it down to, well, there are flies coming out of the body just because another fly came and landed. It included all of these other things in the life of the person that, and everything. So, yeah, I really appreciate you talking about that. Um, and then going on to talk about how we don't uh, say these are good reactions or bad reactions uh, because they're all just in that the flies came from the dead body instead of like, I'm sorry, but I really appreciate you talking about that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think we make sure we measure things, or we discern if things are wholesome or unwholesome, but we don't judge them as ultimately worthy or unworthy. So there's an important kind of but subtle distinction. Everything we encounter is Buddha, and yet we need to discern what is wholesome and what is unwholesome in nurturing Buddha life or awakening. But we never can judge. We're not the ones who can judge other people or other objects or other things as ultimately good or evil. We just practice with them the most sincerely and deeply the way that we can in the present moment, and do the best we can to discern what the best action is, and try to keep learning from our mistakes. Okay, let's see. I think Jinryu had something.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. And it was really interesting to hear that you say it's to see what is the wholesome thing to do in the moment. Because I always appreciated the question Jeremy asked you this morning about when something comes up again and again or seems to stick, how to deal with it. This is something I know very well. So to see what is the wholesome thing is very helpful, but then again, my mind kicks in and asks, how do you know what is wholesome? If I say, okay, it's the teaching and the vows and everything, then my ideas come up and say, oh, that's like living like an ascetic, never go out for a drink, or always live from pure water and dried bread and practice the whole day until your knees burst or whatever. And so that is not very wholesome, I know this, but how to navigate into what is wholesome without falling into the one side of the greedy mind, to say, oh, it might be wholesome to do what treats me well, or what treat other people and reject myself totally, just think of others, and to find the balance and to find what is really wholesome.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It's important, because I appreciate the question, and the thing is that about Buddhism is that we don't have a prescribed, set of behavior that applies to every situation and every person. We have actually when monks become ordained, they're in the Theravada tradition or other traditions, there is a pretty strict rule of conduct. But so I'm not saying that, but as far as the rest of the people go, and actually even monks, as far as you can't prescribe every behavior in every moment. Even if there's 250 precepts, it's a pretty small number of activities when it comes down to it, of what a human being is capable of. And so I think that's why the Buddha had these kind of two teachings, and that were completely part of the other. They're completely each interpenetrated. And so for me, the most important thing to do is to root our life in our Zazen practice. And so that means practice in general. So sometimes our practice may need to be something different than sitting on the cushion. It might be walking meditation, it might be chanting, it might be some other way of letting go. So it's not, we don't have to cling to the sitting posture necessarily. That's not the question. But in this way of letting go, when we really understand what opening or grasping on life is, we study how we can manifest that in other situations. So this is the other part of the teaching. So one teaching is this ultimate teaching that everything is empty and everything needs to be let go of. And the other teaching is that we have to study, cause and effect in order to do that. So how to keep, how to do wholesome things that allow us and others to let go. So for me, studying cause and effect within this body and mind is part of the recipe. Studying it with this deep knowledge or deep faith that all of it is empty. So we study when I had the reaction, when we say a sharp word to someone, when we have self-criticism or criticism of others, and we notice it. We have a faith that what we did there was empty and not real. And then we have a way to study the effects, the causes, the habit patterns that cause that. So for me, for example, people have asked about going to therapy, for example, and is this practice? And I say it can be, and it may be very important for some people, but it needs to be in the context of this ultimate reality of emptiness. So for me, the foundation is this emptiness, or we call it vow, in Mahayana Buddhism, the vow to live with reality as it is, together with all beings, rather than in this self-centered, egoistic way where I'm the center of the universe. So if we can go to therapy to get to have more self-esteem and win friends and get a better job, or have a happy life in samsara, like have more confidence, and those are not bad things. But We can also go to therapy or study our karmic tendencies, our bad and so-called wholesome or unwholesome activities as an expression of our vow. As an expression of our desire to live together in a healthy way with all beings. So, to answer your question, I think we keep walking more and more deeply towards our vow, and we keep studying more and more deeply. Dogen Zenji had these two kinds of teachings that I think the Buddha had, were inspired, of course, and implicit in the Buddha's teaching. And one is that any particular moment is complete awakening when we sit in Zazen or when we let go of our self-centered, delusive ideas. The other is a gradual walking towards awakening to get more skillful in recognizing what is wholesome and unwholesome. So it's a journey, I think, that we keep walking and penetrating, and what we really need to do is keep in touch with our vow, with our life energy. This energy to keep trying, this energy to keep healthy. We call it bodhicitta in Buddhism, but Ucham Roshi called it the life force, I think, or we can call it vow, but it means this energy that life has to blossom and be healthy and share and express. So I'm sorry, but I think that's the best I can really do is to keep studying this self deeply and have support from our Dharma friends, a trusted person, especially with more experience than we have, that we trust is very valuable. But in the end, we, of course, have to do our own practice and keep studying this body and mind and learn from our mistakes. So, at some point we start learning, oh, well, that's the trick of, I want to be an ascetic practitioner so that I can feel good about myself and probably better than other people. That might be one story. Like I went through that at some period. I want to be a Theravada monk, so I'll be really a great practitioner and probably better than most other people. I didn't say that to myself, but I think when I really studied it deeply, that's what was happening. When I was really honest with myself, I was like, I want to do this because I want to be like a badass or something, I think, rather than actually express my vow, And it's important, but it's difficult, of course, to see those things, and it takes some time sometimes. So I'm sorry I can't do much better, but I hope something was helpful.
Indeed, very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, is there anything else today we need to talk about before? Let's see, I think it's Jeremy, right?
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for having me. That was it. I didn't know if this was the right time or not.
Yes. Well, let's. I'm glad you said that, Jeremy. Actually, we appreciate having you. I appreciate having you here very much. You came all the way from Conway. Actually, Lacey lives in Conway. And would you like to say anything just about how you came here, or just hello, or anything else? No pressure, but if you want
Um,
to say something.
I don't have anything super grandiose, but just thankful. I really I encourage everyone to get either here or just outside in nature. Just the drive here alone was refreshing to my spirit. I've come to this part of the state um, during these periods of my life, and I guess the first one was when I was like about 7, 8, 9. Um, in Boy Scouts, we would come up here and camp and all the hills and paddle and stuff like that. And then, high school, I clearly was too cool for Boy Scouts, so dropped out of that. But then in college, when I kind of like found my second wind, the age of 20, 22, something like that, came right back up here and spent some time, and then had kids and life and everything else, and I don't know. So I'm not sure how to label this midlife type of reason that I'm here, but it's special. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that, and welcome, Jeremy. We appreciate you making the effort to come and practice with us. So, thank you very much. And Sky is here for the first time. Would you just like to say
Yes.
hello?
Hello. I'm not sure who all's on Zoom, but I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy that we're all connecting the nodes of consciousness together, experiencing internal growth with what we can, and walking a path with heart. And I'm inspired. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shorya, for hosting all of this and making it possible.
Thank you, Sky. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you sharing your practice with us. And I met Sky about probably 10 or 11 years ago for the first time. He looked very different back then. His mom actually helped us get Gyobutsuji. So we have some connection. His mother helped us to find this place. So just as a side note, please tell her hello for me, and it's good to see you again. I don't think I would have recognized you if you hadn't told me who you
Well,
are.
yeah, she did send a very large hug to give you. So here soon, I'll be transferring it.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. One thing I should say too, I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I won't be giving talks in August. This is a kind of tradition my teacher did, and I happily embrace it. Actually, it gives it gives me the opportunity to do some traveling and do some other work that needs to be done. But we will be here every week, and we'll meet. And if there are questions about the Dharma or the text we're studying, we can certainly talk about those a bit, or just say hello. And but I'll start talking about this text again after Sesshin, I guess, in September. So I think that's it. Anything else we needed to talk about before we sign off? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.